Welcome back, everyone. This is the Kent City Council Workshop. Today is Tuesday, October 5th, 2021, and I'd like to welcome everyone that is joining us this afternoon. We have one item on the agenda, and it's a very hot topic, so I'm going to welcome Paula Painter, our Finance Director, to continue the conversation on our mid-biennium budget adjustments. Welcome, Paula.
Thank you very much, Council President Troutner, members of City Council, Mayor, nice to be here tonight. So starting off today, I thought it would be great to at least run all of you through the questions that we've collected to date that haven't been addressed. I know at our last workshop, there were several questions that were raised. We've addressed those, we've logged them, but then there are some that still needed a little bit more attention. First off, there was a question that was raised about the vacant officer positions. How many of those do we have now? Overall, there's 165 commissioned police positions, of which 145 of them are currently filled. 5 positions are frozen and 15 are vacant, in which there's offer letters that are out there for some additional positions. 2 positions for sure have been accepted and will be starting. So that would then be reducing our 15 vacancies down to 13 in that arena. And then later tonight, you're going to have an opportunity to hear from Marina, Julie, and Derek to talk about eviction. So questions number 26 and 27. King County has the eviction prevention and rental assistance program, so you'll learn more about that. You'll learn how the city will be getting that message out about those programs to residents here in Kent. So that will be coming up after this session. Question number 28, there was a question about the total revenue increase. So what we're going to do, you're going to see over here in the status column that I'm going to plan to address some of these via email. I think it'll be easier for me to put and compile my thoughts together and get those out to you guys. And should you have follow-up questions, I'm really happy to address those after that. Or if you need additional conversation beside what ends up in the email, please let me know and we can get that arranged as well. So with the next 4 items, you're going to find that we are going to be doing these responses via email, talking about the $125,000 for the comprehensive plan for ECD. Valleycom did decrease at $205,000. Real quick short answer on that. They changed how they do their calculation for this, but I'll give you more insights in that email on how they calculate those rates. And then also the voter registration fees went up. Again, that was the way they calculate how much they charge out for this, and are now covering their overhead. But again, I will provide more clarity on that. Oops, hold on, I'm controlling this one here. So went too far. Question 32. Question 32, part of the confusion with that is we did see an error on our page 30. So we've provided you with a new page replacement. What was happening is the Community Navigator program was showing up under Human Services, and really that is a program that belongs to ECD. So I'll send out some more information about that program via the email that I'll send out. Question 33. The Senior Center Coordinator program, there is going to be a reduction in line item that will help to offset part of that costs, and I will address that in the email as well. Question 34, this is about the list too, whether this should be the Operations and Public Safety Committee or the Public Works Committee. And so I'd like to turn that over to you guys for a little discussion so we can get some direction on what you would like to do with that.
So any thoughts or comments about which committee?
Which item are you looking at?
Number 34.
I mean, at this point, I think because we are talking about a budgeted item, that I think maybe ops would be more appropriate, and then that way all 7 of us have the opportunity to discuss it, but I'd like to know your thoughts on that.
Yeah, ops seems appropriate to me as well.
Okay.
Because it is the signage.
All right. Thank you, Paula.
Yeah, thank you. All right, Operations Committee. Okay. On Question number 35, on page 32, there is a chart that's at the bottom of that page, and it does include ARPA funding. So in that email, I'll send out a new chart that excludes that, so the chart doesn't look as skewed, and hopefully providing you a little bit with more information from the perspective that you're hoping to see. Question number 36, there's a question regarding discussion that's needed on that topic, that we can schedule something for the Operations and Public Safety Committee meeting to have some further discussion about that. Body-worn cameras are $164,000. That is increased budget. What I'm going to go ahead and do is break that out in an email so you can see what makes up those exact dollars and get that sent out to you as well. With the co-responder model, question number 39, there's a question as to why we would purchase additional vehicles versus using additional motor pool or Kent Police Department vehicles. Again, I'm going to be connecting with the chief on that, getting some information and including that in my email to you. Question 40. Now, question 40 has to do with ARPA funds and how we are using them. There's a specific question is I'd like to see the direct line item comparison of how the infrastructure spending in this section as direct replacement for revenue loss. I think what I want to do is just spend a little bit of time kind of explaining the ARPA funds and how they're going to be used and the connection between what we see in the budget versus what the intent is behind that. So I'm going to hopefully be able to document that for you in a meaningful manner and handle that through email. And again, I can always follow up with additional conversation outside of that email should we need to. But then there's another second part to this question. And I think the second part to this question when we're talking about pivoting placemaking capital and infrastructure projects to capital and infrastructure projects benefiting a broader base of residents in ways more directly in line with the intended purpose of the pandemic recovery funds. And these would be things like citywide broadband, sidewalk completion, pedestrian safety, etc. And I think in this regard, this would really fall on the council, as I think this falls into a policy decision that needs to be made. And I think that further discussion needs to happen on how we want to do this investment in infrastructure. And I kind of want to turn this over to you and maybe provide you guys with an opportunity to have a little conversation about how do we best go about having that conversation.
So Councilmember Lambert, did you want to make a comment first because this was your question?
Yeah, I'll start. So when I think of the recovery dollars and the infrastructure spending and recognizing that it is on. Am I too soft? Okay. So recognizing that the ARPA dollars is the Recovery Act coming out of COVID. And I know that it is one-time spending. It's not obviously something we want to do programmatically or be tied to it in that way. But I still think that there is one-time spending that seems to be a better fit for the intent of these funds. I know during COVID, I heard a lot about students that were really struggling to get broadband services or quality broadband and sitting out on, balconies trying to make sure that they had signal. I also continue to hear from residents about incomplete sidewalks along 132nd and 116th on East Hill. And I know that there's problem areas with sidewalk completion on West Hill as well. So it just feels to me like there might be a better use of infrastructure spending here. And so I wanted to suggest a few things and have a discussion about it.
So are you suggesting taking that, is there a project that you would like to see us not do to be able to?
Yeah, I am questioning the placemaking for military and veterans. That was a new one.
Page one.
Page 58. And then I know that there is some placemaking in the Naden. And so so yeah, I just feel like that there's, placemaking to me would be secondary to some of these more some of these other infrastructure projects that would have a more direct benefit to the community.
So Paul, I don't know if you can answer this question, but are these projects in particular that are on page 58, are they tied to any kind of grant funds or money that that would be allocated to spend on? Yes.
We'll call
Do
the
you
Public
mind
Works
coming up?
Director up here.
Thank you.
Good evening. Quick item, we'll go to military and veterans first. I think that was just getting ready for the 509, completion of the 509 project and having the new gateway coming into town. We have development on both sides, but the improvements coming down the hill could use a little bit of sprucing up because it's going to be a new main avenue down into the valley. And then moving over to Naden. You remember when we got the break in access for Naden and then the funds to finish the 4th and Willis roundabout? Part of that was to work. Thank you. Work through the state, and it's essentially an improvement and completion of that gateway all the way through the Willis Street 167 interchange.
Okay. So again, with, when I'm hearing gateway and sprucing up, it just doesn't strike me, I think, as maybe top priority for use of an ARPA fund.
Yeah, I think that council could definitely have a discussion on veterans, but for the Naden improvements, I think that really is part of our promise to the WashDOT on what was going to happen once we got the roundabout.
Okay, and what does that, what does that provide for us? I mean, without that, what happens?
Well, we approached, if you remember, it took us about 20 years to get the break-in access. And part of that was allowing folks to come down and use the roundabout and get back into Naden Avenue, which you need to complete that connection onto the property. So that's the $2.8 million is that funding. So it's really part of the completion of the Willis Street improvements that we promised the state we would be doing when we talked about the break-in access.
Okay. I think, since it has been going on, like break-in access, that's not ringing a bell for me. So if I could maybe just get some information via email, a little bit more background on that.
Draw the whole thing up if you prefer.
That would be helpful.
Okay.
Thank you.
And if it would help, we could bring it to Public Works Committee.
Oh, okay.
And because there's quite a history to it.
Yeah,
Okay.
that'd be helpful. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Todd. Councilmember Boyce.
Thank you. I appreciate that, Councilmember Larmer. When you think about Gateway, I think about Meeker. When you come into Kent, that is something we're trying to bring a new identity to Kent when you first get here. And you got at least 3 veterans up here. I'm sure there are a lot of veterans who live in Kent. And I just think...
I'm a daughter of a disabled Vietnam vet, so
okay.
this
so.
isn't about veterans at all. Yeah.
So I just think there's, something we need to think about. And then another thing, right? It just, if it's one-time money, then, we just need to be careful that there's no sustainability behind that. So, but I am open to the discussion, and we'll just kind of, as a council, sit here and talk about it and kind of see where we end up at. The Naden one, I don't know enough about even to talk about, so but I do want to express my concern about the first one, though. Thank you.
Thank you. Councilmember Michaud.
Thank you, Council President. I'm wondering for many of these things that Councilmember Larmer has proposed, I feel like some of them are already planned. I'm sure we have a plan to address sidewalk safety. And then also some of these things might be paid for by funds, not general fund. And then could $1 million pay for citywide broadband? I don't know. So I just have a lot of questions, I guess.
Yeah.
Thank you. Councilmember Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chad, isn't the 132nd sidewalks kind of already pre-planned to go quite a ways? I think to 240th. I can't recall now. But just as he's walking up here, the Veterans Drive, I can't think of a better time than right now to honor our veterans, and this is kind of a placemaking thing. I think that would be wonderful. I'd hate to see that cut. But go ahead, I'm sorry, Dan, if you can answer my question.
Yeah, so the 132nd sidewalks, we have the ultimate section of 132nd that still needs to get built. That's a very expensive project, and that's why we built the walking path between 240th and 272nd over the last, gosh, it's been 5 years, where we got the 2 TIB grants. We have another plan to, actually applied for TIB to go from 272nd down to 282nd, if I remember correctly, south of 272nd. So there's a walking path on 132nd from 240th down to 272nd, which takes us quite a ways. We'd also like to go north further, but again, it's an expensive proposition. So
If I can interrupt, I think I saw you're already up to 256 going north. I think you had planned to go to at least 240th?
we go to 240th on the
Right.
on the west side of the street.
On one side, oh, that's right.
Yep.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Councilmember Larmer.
I'm sorry, I totally just lost my train of thought, but I will, I had another question that'll come back to me, but yeah, in northbound, I know that the big gaps I'm hearing about are actually north at 240th. So, oh, I know what it was. It was the question of, I think it's, also a matter of new spending versus, yeah, we might have these things planned for, but this is not an opportunity to take the money and actually complete some of these projects sooner. So I think that, again, would, be my preference.
All right, Derek, did you want to add something?
Yeah, thank you, Madam President. I just wanted to introduce a new way of thinking of this. It doesn't necessarily have to be an either or. You might recall that the proposed budget leaves about $7.3 million remaining in ARPA funds, and the idea is that ARPA funds can be spent through 2026, and we don't want to spend everything within the first couple of years and not have some to meet needs in the future. But you could, if you wanted, still fund military and veterans as well as Willis at Naden and still take some money, a few $100,000, and put it into, say, a sidewalk grant matching fund. So as we're able to find grants in order to complete sidewalks, there would be matching dollars there. So there might be a way to think outside of the box here and do an and rather than an or.
Good. I like that.
Thank you. Councilmember Michaud.
Thank you, Council President. I was going to raise the same, not the same idea, but say, isn't there some more money out there? So that was just my point. But I'm just wondering if we should do that now or for the budget next year.
You mean as far as allocating some of those funds at this point? Okay. Well, I think I'm hearing a few things here, and I don't know, Derek, you can jump in if, we definitely have asked for a little bit more information on the Naden so that we can all kind of have the history behind that and maybe help in that thought process. Definitely some other questions on, what sidewalk or safety projects we've got happening, what it would look like to add some additional. And then I have questions about, citywide broadband, how much, what are we looking at as far as costs and to maintain something like that? Because that to me doesn't necessarily seem like a one-time expense. And I don't know, I just hear that and I hear very, very expensive. So a lot of things that I think that we're all asking for some additional information to continue this conversation. That sound right, Derek?
Yeah, we can make a note to revisit this question in a couple of weeks, and by then you'll have heard some more information about Willis and Naden in the Public Works Committee, and as well as had a chance to kind of think this through and maybe ask something more specific that we can put into the log.
Great. Does that work for you, Councilmember Larmer?
Yes, it does. Thank you.
Okay.
I appreciate that.
Councilmember Fincher, did you want to add something?
Yes, I would just like, since it's going to come to Public Works when we get the additional information, I'd like to know what was the original plan for both projects. If we didn't have ARPA funds, we had a plan to get these completed. What was the timeline? How was it going to take? Where was the money going to come from? That sort of thing.
Great question. And Councilmember Boyce.
Yeah, the citywide broadband sounds good. Are there any other neighboring city that we know that have citywide broadband that you're aware of, Derek? Any city?
Not off the top of my head locally. Nationally, there are a few examples.
Yeah, it sounds good, but I'd be interested what that sustainability is, right? I mean, it'd be nice to have it, but just whether or not you can sustain that. So, but open for the discussion.
Great, thank you. And just a reminder for those of us that are not on Public Works Committee, when we do see that item on the agenda, make sure you tune in and get that information so that we can have a better discussion when we bring that back here. So, thank you.
All right. So that is question 40. Let's go ahead and move on to the next page. Question 41. So on page 53 of the budget book, there's two sentences that are at the end of the paragraph related to STEM education, youth employment readiness, and pre-apprenticeship partnerships, which speaks to what is missing is the utilization of programs of participation in mentor networks by staff and families of Kent. We would like to create programs that connect Kent residents and potential future employers. And so the questions really are, what are we actually going to do about that? And what are we going to do differently with the ARPA funds that we haven't already tried? And how are we going to be reaching the most at-risk youth with this endeavor? So we're going to have Bill Ellis take this to workshop in 2 weeks on the 19th of October to provide you with a little bit more information on that. I think that one would be best handled through workshop versus an email.
Great.
Question 42 has to do with the utility clearing account. This is really a change in how we're doing an accounting for something, which is why you're seeing a big dollar number. Again, it's kind of like that quarter that moves from one fund to the next, and that's what you're seeing, but we'll write that up in an email and really explain that to you to give you better clarity on that. Also give you more clarity on question 43 relating to ending fund balances. Why are they different? And what happens to a surplus, and really, there's really not a surplus, but we'll have that conversation. I'll document that for you. On question 44, there's a question about the law domestic violence line item that's within the criminal justice fund. I'm going to tell you now that that's an error in accounting where something got recorded to a wrong account number, which then fed into the reports, which is why you're seeing them. Okay. So I'll go ahead and address that in the email. And then question 45, it says, what police programs are paid for out of this fund, meaning this fund is the criminal justice fund, versus the general fund for that $4.4 million, and what are police special programs? So we'll go ahead and get that documented and out to you as well in the email. The $2 per capita, does it reflect the latest census data? Again, I'll send that out. Short answer is yes, it does get adjusted to it. We do use OFM's number, but then OFM does adjust it to census, but I'll make sure I have that clearly documented in that email as well. And then question 47, provide a list of fleet vehicles being considered for replacement by vehicle type and lower emission options that are available. So what we're going to do is we're going to ask that Public Works brings this forward to the Public Works Committee. And it's really similar to a question that was asked earlier, question number 25. So this will give an opportunity at Public Works Committee to go through all of that information with you. And then question 48, where is the $150,000 in lodging tax replacement? Ultimately, that is just to let you know it hasn't fallen off our radar. It's earmarked, so it means it's not in the budget. What's going to happen, and just to provide you a little clarity with the revenue replacement, what's going to happen is we're doing a citywide analysis of all of the revenue losses, and then we'll be allocating out those dollars as one big allocation to the appropriate funds where they need to go. The $150,000 that was earmarked for LTAC. That's an old number based on a point in time at the very beginning of the budget process of how much had we lost to date, but that was a while ago. It doesn't account for many other things. So you'll see a full analysis come forward related to that as we move through this process. So again, you won't see that because it was only an earmark letting you guys know we're not going to let that fall off our radar. Gotcha. Question 49 has to do with Green Kent Stewards Program. I'm going to verify with Parks, and I'll be having to get back to you, and I'll send that out via email regarding that program. And then question number 50. We're almost done. 2 more, guys. Question 50. There's funding in the budget for child care providers, but no additional funding for families to assist with the cost of child care for their children. And there's families that are in need of help to pay for that child care. So what we're going to do is, this really is part of that big collaborative conversation that we're going to be having about the Building Resilience Fund, that $1.75 million that's been set aside. So you'll have an opportunity to talk about how those dollars will be utilized and what resources that those would be going towards. So I think that although you don't specifically see it, it's going to be part of a broader conversation. And then question 51, addressing graffiti. Councilmember Fincher is asking about the two different things here. The ability to be able to hire youth and unsheltered individuals to paint out graffiti, and then also painting murals over sites where graffiti is frequently targeted. And so what I'm recommending is that this really should probably be another one of those council directions that we're going to need from you on how we want to address this moving forward. So if you want to talk amongst yourselves and help us out with the path forward, that would be fantastic.
Councilmember Fincher, did you want to speak on this?
Yes, we have a lot of graffiti all around the town. And I was surprised. I was driving through Des Moines the other day, and down Pack Highway, take a right into Des Moines, I saw one trash can that had graffiti that had been painted out. I'm sure there is some in Des Moines. I don't see why they would be free of it, but I drove around quite a bit and didn't see any. I see it on West Hill, I see it East Hill, I see it in the valley here. And we don't have the staff to paint it out readily. So I think it would be a good way to help both sides, some of the people who are looking for work and may not be skilled, to put them to work painting out some of the graffiti that we have. We could get a quicker response time. So I know that might involve union conversations, but we have a lot of graffiti, and talk about a gateway to the city. A lot of that graffiti is in the gateways to our city. So I'd like to see some of that addressed and taken care of.
Councilmember Thomas.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This question might be addressed to Chief Padilla. Is this something that the prisoners in the jails could do? Take them out on work parties and give them a little exercise and. Again, I don't know about the union problems, but.
Yeah, so as you know, historically, we have used our trustees at the city jail to go out and do cleanups and camp removals. COVID has put a 100% stop to that because we don't have any inmates in our jail that aren't required to be in there because of a public safety risk, so they wouldn't be eligible. In addition to that, we have really leaned out through our courts who's in our jails, and right now we're not having enough people eligible in our system to do camp cleanups or anything of this sort. So it's something we want to be able to go back to, but I think the bigger issue here and probably the biggest push for the request is a sustainable, reliable source to do this work so that when it gets shut down like this, we don't have this setback that we have now.
I guess one of my thoughts, if I may. When we were kids, if we did something like that, we're the ones who had to go back and paint over it or repair it or do whatever we did to it. And so I was just thinking out loud here that, you know, those who are most responsible for doing the graffiti should be the ones painting over it. And that's just my inward thought process.
And if we can bring back the program, we will. It's just one of those things, we need a resource now, I think.
Okay, appreciate it.
Councilmember Larmer.
Thank you. Yeah, I think this, you know, without knowing the full details of the program, I think this makes sense. I mean, King County on September 30th announced that they are hiring unsheltered individuals to clean parks. And so it seems like this, you know, is something that we could look at how they, you know, how they accomplish that in their program model and see how we could
Can I ask her a question? Thank you. Councilmember Lerma, are you saying this is a good idea, the one that's proposed here, is hiring out?
Yeah, hiring the unsheltered individuals to paint out graffiti. King County is hiring unsheltered individuals to clean up parks.
Okay.
And so
Thank
I'm
you.
thinking that they may have a, you know, a model and a way the program runs that we could take a look at and mirror. Also, you know, I think there's another part of this to look at too. I think, you know, we've long known that sometimes we have to get permission to paint the graffiti on private property. But I think that there's also weighing that conversation of how much risk it is. I have a hard time finding, you know, that residents would really be opposed to us cleaning up very high visible graffiti, whether it's a private fence or not. So I think maybe there's something to look out there at making the cleanup easier for our crews to accomplish.
Thank you. Councilmember Boyce.
Thank you, Madam President. Yes, I think when we were talking about this last time, the litter program, I brought up graffiti, right? So how we can be able to make that part of it. Now, I think that, you know, when we talk about Kent Green, talk about the union, that would be something that we're going to have to work through, similar to this particular program here. I guess I just can't visualize how that's going to be working yet, because just, I mean, how will you track and do you do it by building, or you get you $20 an hour to go this side? You know, it just, to me, it'd be interesting to see how we could flush that out to make it work. But I think could be complicated, but I think probably something we need to discuss from a policy perspective, just what that will look like, because I just can't, you know, from an accountability perspective, you know, I just can't quite see how we get there. But definitely open to having a discussion.
Councilmember Fincher.
I'll let Councilmember look like you were wanting to say something there.
Okay, and thank you, Brenda. Thank you, Madam Chair. Bill brought up something that just triggers something too. Okay, so you have one person painting over something, but now you're going to have to somehow supervise that. Mm-hmm. So now instead of paying one person to do something at $20 an hour, we also have to have somebody else overseeing it that might be paying $30 an hour. So I'm just not into this right now. I'd like to think about it, process it a little bit more.
Nobody work for $20 an hour, so you're going to have a lot higher than that, I can tell you that.
All right, Councilmember Fincher.
Thank you. I agree that, you know, if I did it, if my kids did something wrong, they were the ones who had to go and fix it. But I think part of the problem is that we are not catching who is responsible for it, which is why it's so rampant in the city. So that's one reason. And yeah, you know, we would have to flush out how this works and talk with HR and talk with the insurance team and all sorts of folks. But I think it's an idea that we need to look at and would hopefully be workable. That about the public and private property. Sometimes it is on public property in our parks in different places. So there are places that would definitely be within our realm of responsibility that we could take a look at and get that part improved while we're working through some of the other part. But yeah, I think that would be able to come up with a way to make the program work, and we can see what other places are doing, how they are doing it. We have models not only in Seattle, but other places also.
Derek, did you want to wait through all of our questions or comments first, or would you like to go?
Oh, I can wait.
Councilmember Michaud.
Thank you, Council President. I agree with Councilmember Fincher. I think it's worth looking into, and I want to hear what Derek has to say.
Well, really quickly, I do have a lot of questions about this too. In this conversation, you know, it's made me think of how, like you said, how do you organize these people? I just see this as being an added expense because now we're being asked to pay these people, but we also have to pay someone to supervise them. So that, aside from a policy issue, is a whole nother budgeting expense that we have to consider. But I also, I mean, there's a lot of things that I think about when you're paying an unsheltered person. What does that look like as far as, do they go on our payroll? Or, you know, I would think that there's a lot of logistics and different things that go into that process. And then it's a matter of, I mean, it sounds like a really good idea, but how many of these people really want to do the work? So, and those are just some thoughts that I have concerning this idea, but it's definitely worth discussing. Derek, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. So yes, lots of logistics questions. Supervision is definitely extensive. You know, maybe there's a way to contract out the work. You know, that's not supervision free because somebody has to write the scope and manage to the scope, but maybe that's an option. I think all we need at this point is to know if a majority of council is interested in enough in moving this forward that we should come up with a number for the budget. We don't need to work out all of the logistics of the program here in the budget process, but we would need a number to include in the budget, and then we can start to develop a specific program.
So, Madam President, if you put a number in the budget, then there could be a perception, right? Because I don't know, if you put a number there, we could talk about it, and by the time we get through, we might not realize that's a good way to go. So I guess if you put it there, it shouldn't be assumed that it's locked in because there are some discussion need to be done. And I'm open either way. I'm not saying, I just don't want the perception to be, I got it in the budget, it's there, it meant for that, and we must spend it for that.
Yeah, I totally understand that. I think what I'm trying to balance here is that we need to adopt a budget, but there are a lot of logistics to work through. So if we could pick the best number we can at this point, knowing that there may need to be adjustment to it, maybe that's a way to meet the budget schedule and then take the time necessary to delve into the program.
Thank you. Councilmember Kaur, do you have something to add?
Yes, thank you. I think we all agree that graffiti is a big problem in our city, and so we do need to find a way, maybe getting to be part of the litter patrol that's already being funded, or and I think we're just making assumptions here that unhoused individuals don't want to work because everyone is different, every situation is different. So I think we definitely need to look at. I agree with Councilmember Larmer. We need to look at how King County is addressing this and what steps they're taking and how this program is going to be, if it's going to be as successful and what their experiences are. I think we should definitely take that in consideration before we just start shooting it down, in my opinion. But I think we definitely need to look at something for graffiti because it's a huge problem. And we're not able to cover it up fast enough. And so that's where I'm at. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm going to continue on. Councilmember Larmer, followed by Michaud, then Councilmember Thomas.
Thank you, Council President. Yeah, I would actually like, I think perhaps to recommend that we take a look at what the litter strike team line item budget would look like with a graffiti element, and maybe we can take a look at with and without that. What if we were to wrap this unsheltered individuals to paint out graffiti as part of our part of that litter strike force, and more of like a two-pronged approach to cleaning up the city. So maybe we could, I don't know if that'd be possible to look at what that litter strike force would look like. We know the figure alone. What would that look like if we were to add an element of this? And then again, to Councilmember Kaur's point, I just want to emphasize, I feel like a lot of times we let something new, the logistics around it and the questions around it, keep us from looking at new options and new ideas. And obviously other cities, jurisdictions, and counties have figured this out. So I'm not convinced it's undoable just because we have never done it before. I think we need to start thinking outside the box and looking at new things. Otherwise, we're going to get stuck in the status quo that we are in today at times.
Thank you. Councilmember Michaud.
Thank you, Council President. So I was wondering if we could just add some money to the litter patrol for now that would be dedicated to cleaning up graffiti, and then that would give us some time to look into this project, see how it's going in King County, and come up with a clear plan for the biennium budget. That's just a thought.
All right. Thank you, Councilmember Michaud. Councilmember Thomas.
Thank you, Madam President. So I'm having some problems here. If we list this line item amount as hiring the homeless, I'm having a problem. If we say it's for cleanup of graffiti, I probably don't have a problem putting that a line item. But if you sign any kind of an amount listing hiring the homeless or whatever, I think you're going to cause some problems to the general public, and I have a problem with it because this is a whole new concept, spending money, hiring, and yet it's that's the thing I'm really concerned about. Is the awareness that we're supposed to be good stewards of our people, the people's money, and I don't think if we list something like this on the budget, that could be perceived that way. I find it more negative than positive. If we had the wording right, I probably wouldn't have a problem to say graffiti cleanup. Here's where we're going to assign $1 million next year to our budget. Okay, I can go with that. But hiring the helpless or homeless, that creates a problem for me, and I think it would create a problem for the general public, to which we serve.
Thank you. Councilmember Fincher.
Thank you. There are people who are unsheltered, who are quite studious, who are quite skilled and able to work. So, what I'm hearing, and maybe I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing is the assumption is that because somebody is living out by the river or they don't have a home, whether they're couch surfing or whatever, I think you're shortchanging them on the person's value themselves and their dignity. There are some, I agree, just like there are some who are in houses who don't want to work, they don't want to do anything at all, but there are a number of them who do want to work and who do want to move and change their status in life. So I think it would be shortchanging them, and a way, I'm seeing this program as a way to help both sides. We get something, we get the graffiti cleaned up, and people want homeless people gone. If you have money, maybe that can help make that happen. And so it's, to me, a win-win situation. With that being said, I also would be amenable to moving this to when we start the biennial budget, because I would want to be able to have ideas and conversations after getting information with finance, with HR, with insurance, with seeing how it would work if they were contract workers and taking some of that responsibility away from the city. And also, for city property, it's probably good. We probably have paint that matches. But another thing is all the mismatched paint. So that would be a cost in the program. But to be able to flesh it out. But I don't want this just kicked down the road where 3 years from now we're still looking at a bunch of graffiti that is not getting any better.
Thank you. Councilmember Boyce.
Thank you, Madam President. I think might have been Councilman Michaud. I think we all agree maybe we should put some money to a side and put it in the bucket, right? At the end of the day, it's all about the policy, right? So we got to figure out what that policy is going to say, and that's something we can have to work here on the dais. I think everybody agree that graffiti is a mess, need to be cleaned up. So we could talk this to death. At the end of the day, I think we all agree money need to put to a side. And then from there, we, as a council, we need to work on a policy, on what that policy look like to drive how we initiate that.
Thank you. Councilmember Thomas.
Thank you, Madam President. I'd like to respond to Councilmember Fincher here. If these people that are out there are able and to go to work, driving down here today, I must have seen 7 signs for help wanted, come on in, we need help. I'm not sure I could go along with your logic. And I know your concern. I'm just having a problem, really thinking that you think these people are out there, whether they live on the river or in a house, are able to work. Why aren't they working? Well, it's because they get paid to not work. And that bothers me a lot too, but that's another subject. So anyway, that's enough said.
Councilmember Fincher, did you want to comment?
Yes, I'll just make it short. So as you know, with my regular day job, I work with some of the people. So there are some who are not connected to funds, which is one of the things that getting connected to services helps do, because you're not getting that money already. And some of them have records or other hardships in their life that keep them from being able to get a job. They're not going to be able to walk into where I work and start working. They're not going to be able to come into the city and start working. But they have skills and given a chance, they could redeem and move back into a regular productive part of the society. So, and instead of just counting everybody out and saying no, we give it a chance. We've hired employees here where we've seen later that they've had problems. They didn't have to be homeless. And so, you can't put everybody into the same pond. There are a million different reasons for a million different people who are homeless. So I just think that we have to not lump everybody into the same pond and do something to help get some of that graffiti gone. Like I said, we talk about the gateways and wanting people to come in. What do you think when you drive by the street and you see graffiti on a building, graffiti on a fence, graffiti all over? That also is sending a message.
Paula, can you remind me, how much are we spending on the line item for the 2 litter?
The litter?
Yes.
1 million from the general fund and 250,000 from the drainage fund, so a total of 1.25 million.
Okay, and is that for?
That pays for 2 maintenance workers as well for 3 years, as well as consulting services to be able to hire in people to clean certain areas.
Okay. Derek, did you want to help us, lead us in the right direction?
It sounds like there's enough interest in staff putting together a number, and it's going to be a very rough estimate, but something that we can bring back to your next workshop, and then you can choose if that's something that you want to include in the budget, and then start to work on program development at the end of this year and into next year.
Just, Madam Chair, one quick question. Paul, you say a consulting service?
No, for not a consultant service.
Okay.
I'm sorry. For
I can say I want that job. You're hiring a consultant service for that. Okay.
No, it's not for consultant service. Sorry.
All right. Thank you.
It's just Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, so that ended my part of the discussion. I see I have some follow-up homework here to do. I am continuing to collect questions if they come in and update the list, but what I will tell you is that I will put together, as you can see, I have this listed as draft. I will put this in final form and get this out the door to you guys. Likely tomorrow will be in meetings for most of tonight, so get that out to you, and then you'll get a follow-up from me with answers to these questions. I'm not going to say you'll have them all in one big email. You may get a few different emails from me just so I can start getting some of this out the door to you guys. So at this point, my part of the presentation is done, unless you have any more further questions for me. And I'd like, but then after that, if you don't have questions, I'd like to turn it over to Marina.
Any questions? All right.
All right.
Thank you, Paula.
Thank
We
you.
appreciate all your hard work on this.
Good evening. I'm going to be doing a fairly quick presentation on the topic of rent assistance. I know that several of you had some questions about this topic, and it is a little convoluted, so I will do my best to explain how this is working in Kent and King County. Just as a quick piece of background information, I think you all are well aware that the state bridge moratorium will end at the end of this month. And until that time, landlords are still prohibited from evicting a tenant for past due rent during the pandemic up through July 31st. The vast majority of information you're probably hearing and the vast majority of rent assistance that will be offered in the community will largely be through King County's Eviction Prevention and Rental Assistance Program, otherwise known as EPRAP. And it's really a two-pronged process. So we have the eviction prevention, which is a $24 million contract with the Housing Justice Project. And that's really designed to stop active evictions. And then we have the rental assistance side that will really be designed to preempt evictions. So that will be handled by actually paying past due rent for tenants. The EPRAP program will pay past, current, and future rent. It will target resources to the people that are most in need. I think you've probably heard recently that King County expects or hopes that they will be able to pay the rent of all of the current individuals in their tenant pool that are at that 50% AMI or below. So they're really targeting that lower income bracket for those funds. And tenants can be eligible to basically a year of funding for this. So it'll pay for up to 9 months of current and past due rent, but it will also allow 3 months of future rent to be paid. And then anything that was due beyond that amount, the landlord has to agree to waive. There are 3 basic different components to how the county is handling the EPRAP fund. So the landlord program is something that is eligible for any landlords in King County who have at least 5 tenants who are behind on their rent. So they can apply to the landlord pool, and then the county will pay the back rent of all of their tenants who are behind. So they won't pick and choose 1 or 2. They'll pay for all of them. There's also the tenant program, which is something that people who have unpaid rent can kind of self-register for. It's a fairly simple process on the county's website. Again, and they're going to be targeting those who are at that 50% AMI or below. And then they have the hub and spoke program. So that's where we have community-based organizations that also have funds, and it's really designed to get to the buy-in for population. So people that might not be as likely to jump onto a website and register, but they're more comfortable going to an agency that they're familiar with in the community. It's a little bit easier to get that in-language assistance. So those are the basic 3 models that you've probably heard about. I do have the list of the landlord program. Well, I'll get to that in a second. But what we do know in terms of EPRAP 2020, because I know there's a lot of questions about our South King County individuals being served through the program. So if we look at the data from 2020, we know that South King County residents were more likely to be served per capita. So this is households served per 1,000 residents. And you can see Kent is up there for number of households that was served last year. And then in terms of what we know now for this year, we do have, and this number is changing by the day. So I updated it a couple different times and finally just gave up. But there's over 2,500 Kent households that have applied to the rent assistance pool to date. And that does not include the landlord pool. I just want to make sure that that's clear. In King County, there were 351 landlords in the property pool, and that included over 25,000 properties. And so this is where I was going to touch on. I do have the list of properties that includes those in Kent. And I was going to try to find a fancy way to show it, but it's huge, and there's a lot of duplication because it includes various addresses. So there's duplicative addresses, and then there's duplicative property names, but rest assured that there are many large apartment complexes that you are very well familiar with. And if you did want to see that list, I'd be happy to share it with you. It's just a little clunky. And then the data down on the bottom is just where the county's currently at with how much they have dispersed. They are getting faster. There's been a lot of media coverage about how slow the county has been getting the funds out the door. they really did have to design an entirely new system to get these funds out. So some of that is understandable. I think they're processing about 500 tenants per week right now. And beginning this month in October, they expect to be getting around $6 million out the door per week.
And Marina, does this money go directly to the landlords?
It goes to the landlord.
Okay.
Which is great because it's been really challenging for those of us who have rent assistance dollars out there to figure out how not to duplicate. So one of the things, really only one of the things that we can do, because I mean, it's so many different databases and systems for processing, is we are asking landlords, requiring landlords to agree to only receive funding from one source per tenant. So not perfect still, and it's something that we're still trying to figure out, but that's how they're doing that. In terms of local resources, this is a list that you have all seen before of programs in Kent who either have had or currently have rent assistance dollars from a variety of sources, so not just county funds, but could be foundations, state funds. So quite a large list of programs. And then when we jump into the city funds itself, so these are just the rent assistance programs that our Human Services Commission funds in a regular year. So this was nothing to do with COVID. This is just who we typically fund for our rent assistance. I tried to show also kind of where we're at in terms of how much has been paid out and how much is left. So these are pretty basic because we pay out on a quarterly basis, with the exception of multi-service center. And then these are the CARES Act programs that you've heard about on different occasions in different meetings, the CDBG CV funds, both the first round and the third round. And one caveat on this data, you'll see a lot of blank spaces where funds have not been paid out to the agency. That doesn't mean they haven't expended funds. One of the things that we've talked about with you, I know, is how complicated the paperwork and processing side of that grant is. So sometimes the agencies have paid out the funds, but they have to have the paperwork, like, every single T crossed and I dotted in order to submit those to us for reimbursement. So it's tricky. And so there's a couple agencies that have had a hard time getting the right information to us. So that is where we are currently at. And then there's some TBD rent assistance set aside down on the bottom too. So we have some additional funds there that we have not allocated to a specific agency yet. The Building Resiliency Fund, I know there was a question about that, and I tried to kind of quickly throw this out. This is something that we'll all be talking about, as Paula mentioned in her presentation, but our thinking was that hopefully it will be a somewhat flexible fund, because we know we'll need some of that basic needs crisis response, but we also want to be able to focus some on the long-term resiliency of our residents. So how can we do better in terms of being more resilient in a future crisis and not having such a disparate impact on our residents? So those are some of the concepts that we've talked about, but by and large, flexible in nature. And then just a quick reminder that there are other protections in place after the moratorium ends, and these are starting to get up to speed. Again, this suite of protections isn't perfect, and I know they're having a hard time hiring attorneys out there right now, but we do have reasonable repayment plans in place. We have the just cause eviction at the state level, right to counsel, and we also still have the eviction resolution pilot project in King County. So with that, if you have questions, I'm happy to try to answer.
Thank you, Marina. I'm going to start with Councilmember Boyce.
Thank you, Madam President. Marina, so you mentioned the 2,500 and 2,530 some people.
The 2,500 people currently in the pool?
Yeah.
Correct.
Do everybody that falls in that 50%, are they automatic in that pool? How did that work? Do you know?
So
have anybody been
it has
rejected?
to do with how they apply. So there's a process that they go through on the King County website to apply for the funds. And then, they do have to kind of self-attest to their income and what their hardship was. But yeah, so there are probably people in there that will not be eligible for the funding. I think I heard somewhere that the county estimates about 75 to 77% of people that's kind of the percentage where people who've applied. And it might even be that they don't live within, they say they live in Kent, but they don't live in Kent or King County even, or they haven't really tied it back to COVID appropriately. You do have to have a tie to your hardship being related to COVID. And then again, it might be the income they may make too much.
So it wouldn't necessarily be based on a apartment unit, right? I mean, because there's...
Well, that's different. So,
Right.
Sorry, say that again?
No, I'm saying there's certain apartments out there that, is really designed for...
Yeah, and we're still trying to really understand that, because I will say that I noticed that one of the apartment complexes in the pool is Birch Creek, and,
Right.
and I was trying to figure that out when it's already kind of a heavily subsidized
Right.
property, so we're kind of waiting on that information, so I'm happy to get back to you. But there are other properties, tax credit housing, that probably, I'm not sure about the income requirements, but 50% and below would be, it would be a fair bet
Okay,
that they'd be eligible.
thank you.
Councilmember Michaud.
Thank you, Council President. Thank you for this presentation, Marina. Will there be any way to find out how many of the Kent residents actually get assistance?
I mean, the county definitely reports that data. So, we didn't get it until several months later with the 2020 data, but it's something that we can definitely check in on. As I understand it, they are still kind of shoestringing their data system together. It's not perfect right now, and I think United Way is even helping to process manual payments, and they have some weird agreement with US Bank. It's all a little bit interesting how they've cobbled it together right now, but they will definitely get that data.
Great. Any other questions or comments? Derek.
Thank you, Madam President. Another question that was raised here is how are we going to get the word out to tenants and residents about this program? So we've actually put together a postcard-size mailer that lets people know that as Kent residents, they're eligible for the county program. As we've seen on other mailers, we include top 5 languages with a QR code on how you can access the county's website, which has a translation function. And we're going to send that to residents of all of our apartments. We wish we could send it to every renter, but we simply don't know for single family what's a rental and what's owner occupied. So we're going to cast that net as widely as we can. We'll reference that card and information in a social media post. And so we're going to try to get that information out directly in addition to the work King County is doing to communicate the program.
Thank you, Derek. Councilmember Larmer, did you have
It was
something?
answered.
Okay.
Thank you.
Wonderful. Any other questions or comments? Councilmember Michaud.
Is there an application deadline?
I honestly don't know the answer to that. Obviously, the sooner the better. We know that there are people in Kent who would be eligible to be in that tenant pool that are not yet signed up. But I'm happy to try to figure that out. Lori, do you know by chance? No? Okay, sorry. And I did just remember one other thing I meant to touch on when I was talking about the flexibility. I know Councilmember Fincher had a question about the eligibility for our funds in terms of that 50 to 80% AMI, because the county's, clearly targeting that 50% or below. And currently, the funding that we provide to agencies can be used up to that 80% AMI, but we know that some of our programs do target much lower. So I would just offer that we definitely, when we talk about flexibility, if that's the gap, then we're definitely willing to talk about whether we target specifically that income group with rent assistance funds going forward.
Councilmember Fincher, did you have additional questions?
I did. Not a follow-up to that, though. So the lottery is all done. Everybody can just call in and they don't have to enter into the lottery now for the landlord help?
The landlord...
I'm sorry, I meant the renter help.
No, so it's still open. So
Okay.
people can still sign up, and it's not really a queue, it's random. So, it's definitely not too late, because anyone could get into that group and still be called up by the county. as I understand it, I think it's averaging like 46 days from beginning to end from when people put their name in, so.
And so that's another part of my question is do you have any idea why it is random? Why don't they just take it in the order, you sign up and?
Part of it is tied back to equity. In the early phases of the pandemic, when they were doing first come, first serve, we recognized that people who are first to sign up for things are typically people who have the time to sit down, they have the computer ready to go, and they have the paperwork and wherewithal to fill out that type of application easily. So it did kind of skew against a lot of our South King County residents who maybe weren't as necessarily ready and capable to get into the pool.
Okay, thank you.
All right, anyone have anything else? All right, thank you, Marina.
Thank you.
Incredibly good information. We've all been kind of waiting to see some of this data in front of us, so appreciate it. We do have a few more minutes left in our workshop, so if you guys don't mind, instead of leaving early, I'm going to give Bill Ellis just a couple minutes to come up and answer one of the questions that we had in our list, so we can cross another one off. So welcome, Bill.
Thank you. Good evening. Councilmember, I think Larimer asked the question about the youth employment, and I kind of had a straightforward answer right away, ready to go before this meeting, so I just thought I'd try to answer it. Right. It's true that we've identified for years some of the enumerated programs like ANEW or AJAC, they're in our community that are doing career-connected learning, and there are a lot of other entities. I met with another one yesterday, Washington Alliance for Better Schools, that are very focused on doing career-connected learning. But the observation is we've identified this issue for about a decade in Kent. We actually haven't, it feels like it, but we actually haven't put any resource or any budget or any spending to the problem, really. What we've been doing is more superficial of connecting the entities and resourcing the entities and making introductions to employers. But there's a lot of programs that have been successful in neighboring cities that have not actually been attempted with Kent school district residents. And I think that's what we're really wanting to tackle with an identified, resource that we've never seen before. So I think I just wanted to highlight that and say, we have, for instance, youth apprenticeship programs in neighboring school districts that have not been adopted in Kent School District. And some of the barriers to that are either perceived or they're actually financial and cause. And so when we're having successful programs in neighboring areas that have not been deployed here, I think what the proposal here is to study what those actual challenges are and try to come to intervene. The other thing is I would say is that a lot of the sort of proven things that have been helpful in getting the most at-risk students connected to careers are some of the more resource intensive. So explaining the budget size, even get a cohort of 20 or 40 students through a program with mentorship, not just an internship, not just a warm handoff, not just, hey, this entity, learn this entity, which is nice. It's a facilitation that we do just sort of regular. But to actually have budget, program, resource, and design is a whole new thing that we're talking about here that I wanted to point out versus some of the other things that you might have heard over time where we made a little bit of a small investment at the port to get a job training center with AJAC, or we've highlighted a youth employment signing ceremony that took place in Kent where Renton school kids working with the CTE program in Renton were hired by Kent employers, but something concerted for Kent, right, working with Kent mentors to be employed in this very same programs has not been tried. And so I think that's a little bit more detail that I think could address your question right away without the suspense of 2 weeks and a workshop. Okay. I don't know if that answers.
Did you have a follow-up, Councilmember Larimer?
No, I just want to follow up. Thank you for this, and thank you for coming up to answer this, immediately, because I think that's one thing that I hadn't realized is that we haven't actually had the resource behind these programs. Because I know you and I have gone out to the different. We've sat down. We've gone and met with Kent School District and at those locations and discussed these things.
And we have a good high-level relationship and a constant. I speak almost weekly with some of these organizations about employer issues and grants and a variety of things. But connecting it one step further to working with my colleagues in human services, who I would be working with a lot with Lori Guilfoyle, would supply a lot of the ideas and connections to CBOs and to nonprofits, and connecting those two work programs have never really been connected with a dedicated budget or resource.
Right.
So
I'm excited to hear
that. All the way conversation to something more concerted and intense is actually the idea here.
Super. I look forward to it. That's exciting. Thank you.
And I had just one other question. I saw Councilmember Larmer. I could just answer one additional one. On community navigation, you had $400,000. Why that number? We extrapolated from the work that Michelle Wilmot did with the Small Business Emergency Grant last year, working with a lot of the community navigators. We kind of figured out what the hourly rate was for that work, and we projected it per year. That became the basis of a federal grant opportunity. And the thing that's happened since this budget process began that you should all know about is that the Port of Seattle and the Accessory Development Organization, which lives at the Seattle Chamber, have liked that model that we've established, and they are now actively fundraising and making asks to other cities to kick in regionally to some of those same community navigator organizations. So I feel like that brings down, there's an economy of scale to this work that brings down the amount that City of Kent would have to ask. So you would ask about why it seems a little low. There's a straightforward one-sentence answer to that I thought I could offer now.
Great. Thank you for that as well.
Thank you, Bill. Councilmember Thomas, did you have something else before we end?
Yes, Madam Mayor. Sorry, Dana. Madam Chairman. Personal privilege here, and there's a scripture that says, "Weeping may endure for the night, but joy cometh in the morning." So after 9 years of no children, I now have my oldest child, and she's here tonight. My oldest one, Joy, had a neighbor, Joy, and then her son, and my oldest grandson, a senior at Kentwood, not Cam like the rest of us, but Kentwood.
No, Kentwood grad.
Student, my son, my grandson, Cameron. So Cameron's here to interview Brenda later, and perhaps myself. So thank you for coming tonight.
Welcome. Thank you for joining us. All right. And with that, we've come to the end of our workshop. So we are going to come back at 7 o'clock for the council meeting. And thank you, everyone. We are adjourned.
Okay.